Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all. Wherever you are tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath, let your shoulders drop, maybe pull the covers up a bit higher, and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. Blackstone Manor stood beneath a winter sky like a stage awaiting its actors. Snow fell softly, muting the world, as though even sound had been asked to leave the scene. Candlelight trembled against polished mahogany and crystal glass, while the scent of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and burning wood filled the air like invisible dialogue. Then came the scream. Lady Eleanor Vance was found dead in the library, concepts beside a shattered wine glass, her silk gown spread like a fallen curtain. The household insisted it was natural tragedy, an accident. A weak heart. But Hercule Poirot saw a performance. Someone in this theatre of wealth was playing the role of innocence, and failing to remember their lines. The curtain rises. Chapter 1. The stage of Blackstone Manor. The manor was not merely a house. It was a carefully designed stage of inherited elegance. Firelight danced across velvet curtains, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers that chimed softly with every passing draught. The air carried the richness of coffee, sweet liqueur, and polished furniture wax. Silk dresses whispered through corridors. Heavy oak doors closed with the dignity of practiced timing. Outside, winter rain tapped against tall windows like impatient applause. Poirot stood in the entrance hall, small and precise, his mustache immaculate even in the chaos of morning. His green eyes studied everything, the arrangement of furniture, the symmetry of grief, the imbalance of silence. "Observe, mon ami," he murmured softly, "this is not simply a house, it is a theatre, and every theatre requires actors." The cast of characters Inspector Japp explained the facts, though Poirot listened only half. Facts were the script police believed in. Poirot, however, watched the performers. Lady Eleanor's husband, Sir Malcolm Vance, played the role of the composed widower. His voice was steady, his posture correct, his grief neatly contained like a folded handkerchief. Miss Clara Reed, the companion, performed sorrow with trembling hands and lowered eyes. Yet her tears arrived with perfect timing, neither too early nor too late. And then there was Dr. Havelock, the family physician, who spoke softly of natural causes, as though rehearsed in advance. Even his concern felt measured, like a practiced bow. The staff moved like background actors, silent, efficient, disappearing when not required by the scene. Poirot adjusted his moustache thoughtfully. "Too perfect," he whispered, "too arranged. Truth does not arrange itself so beautifully." The first scene, the library smelled of leather, old paper, and spilled wine. Shadows from the fire stretched long across the carpet, like fingers refusing to let go. Broken glass glittered near Lady Eleanor's body, catching candlelight like fragments of frozen speech. Poirot stepped carefully, his shoes soft against Persian rugs. The temperature was cold near the window, warmer by the fire, as though the room itself could not decide what emotion to hold. He tilted his head. "Tell me," he said quietly, "who arranged this scene?" No one answered. Of course they would not. Actors rarely admit they are on stage. Director method, Percy Poirot observes one. The performance, Sir Malcolm's grief, was flawless. His voice broke at appropriate intervals. His hand rested gently on the chair as though anchoring himself to memory. Miss Reed trembled beautifully, her breaths shallow and convincing. Even Dr. Havelock displayed controlled concern, the mask of professionalism firmly in place. 2. The Talbot Poirot saw the imbalance. Sir Malcolm's hands were steady. Miss Reed's tears avoided her makeup. Dr. Havelock never once looked at the body directly, only at the witnesses. Grief, when genuine, is disordered. This grief was arranged. 3. The psychology, past case reflection, Poirot's mind drifted briefly to another stage, the case of the Holloway estate. A young woman had once performed shocks so convincingly that even Scotland Yard accepted her innocence without question. She fainted at precisely the right moment, cried at precisely the right sentence, and collapsed when attention peaked. Yet Poirot had noticed something small. She adjusted her gloves after hearing the death announcement. A detail too controlled, too deliberate. Later, it was revealed she had rehearsed her reactions in front of a mirror for weeks. She did not feel grief. She performed it. The body always betrays the rehearsed emotion. Always. 4. The truth Poirot looked around the library once more. "Someone here," he said softly, "knew of the death before it was announced, and they have performed innocence since that moment." He turned slightly, his green eyes gleaming. "You see it now, non-listener engagement. The audience watches. Watch this performance carefully," Poirot said. "Is it truth or theatre?" A clock chimed in the hall, slow, deliberate, like a stage cue. Somewhere a door closed too softly. "Ask yourself," he continued, "why does Sir Malcolm never look at the body?" The fire crackled, as though responding. "You watch with Poirot, yes? Then observe Miss Reed's hands. They tremble, but only when someone is watching." A gust of cold air swept through the library, rustling silk curtains like silent applause. "The stage is set," Poirot whispered. "But who is directing the actors?" First threads of dissonance, Inspector Japp dismissed the inconsistencies. "Simple case, Poirot. Heart failure, old house, too much wine." Poirot did not argue. A director never argues with the stagehand. He simply waits for the performance to collapse. He walked slowly around the room, arranging nothing, but noticing everything. The position of the glass, the angle of the chair, the absence of struggle. Silk rustled behind him. Someone had entered, then stopped too quickly, as though remembering their role. "Ah," Poirot said gently, without turning. "You rehearse your silence well." No reply came, but silence too can be a performance. Ending. The first curtain Poirot stepped back into the corridor, where chandeliers trembled faintly above polished floors. The manor breathed around him, wood, smoke, perfume, and hidden fear. "The stage was set," he murmured, adjusting his moustache with precision. "The players have taken their places." He paused, his gaze sharp as a spotlight cutting through darkness. But already one actor has forgotten their lines. Snow pressed harder against the windows. Somewhere deep within the manor, a clock struck again, slower this time, like a warning. Poirot turned toward the shadows. Let the drama begin. Chapter 2. Enter the players. The drawing room had been transformed into an interrogation theater. Firelight shimmered across polished mahogany, crystal glasses, and velvet curtains heavy with winter shadow. The smell of cigar smoke lingered near the fireplace, mixing with the sweetness of spilled liqueur and fresh lilies, arranged too carefully for morning. Every chair was occupied, every posture deliberate. Even silence felt rehearsed. Poirot stood at the edge of the room, small and immaculate, observing the cast as though waiting for a performance to begin. "Observe, mon ami," he murmured to Inspector Japp. "They believe they are here for questioning. But no, they are here to perform again. The first player, Sir Malcolm Vance." Sir Malcolm sat straight-backed, hands folded with controlled precision. His dark suit was flawless, his grief carefully contained. "I adored my wife," he said softly, voice measured like a rehearsed monologue. "This tragedy, it is unbearable." The chandelier above him flickered, casting moving shadows across his face, like shifting masks. Poirot tilted his head slightly. The performance grief performed with dignity. Controlled voice, no visible collapse. A man holding himself together like a well-trained actor, refusing to break character. The tell but his hands never trembled. Not once. Even when he described discovering the body, his fingers remained still, resting symmetrically on his knees. The psychology, past case reflection, 100+ words. Poirot's mind briefly returned to the case of the Marston Theatre murder. A celebrated stage actor had once convinced an entire audience of his innocence after a backstage killing. He had performed shock so perfectly that even the curtain staff believed him. But Poirot had noticed something subtle. The actor adjusted his cufflinks after hearing the accusation. A man in true emotional collapse does not think of appearance. He reacts. He breaks. The body reveals what the voice conceals. Later, it was discovered he had rehearsed every reaction for hours before police arrived. Every gasp, every pause, every flicker of outrage was practiced. The psychology of performance is simple. Truth is chaotic. Lies are composed. The truth Sir Malcolm was not grieving. He was maintaining control of a scene he had already rehearsed. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. "You perform grief well, monsieur," he said gently. "But grief it does not rehearse. The second player, Miss Clara Reed." Miss Clara Reed sat slightly apart, dressed in black silk that shimmered faintly under chandelier light. Her hands clutched a lace handkerchief. Her eyes remained lowered, as though avoiding the weight of the room itself. "I cannot believe she is gone," she whispered. Her voice trembled at precisely the right frequency. Too precise. The performance fragile devotion, gentle sorrow, the loyal companion devastated by loss. The Talbot Poirot observed carefully. Her breathing changed when Sir Malcolm spoke. Not grief, reaction. She was responding to him, not the dead woman. And her handkerchief remained suspiciously dry between dabs. The psychology Poirot thought of another case. The Lavenham affair, where a governess had performed innocence so convincingly that she nearly inherited an estate through sympathy alone. She had cried on cue, fainted at the mention of inheritance, and smiled when no one watched. Yet she made one mistake. She always looked toward the strongest person in the room before reacting. Not the victim, the power source. Emotion follows interest when it is performed, not felt. The truth Miss Reed was not grieving Lady Eleanor. She was performing for Sir Malcolm. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured softly. "This is not mourning. This is positioning." The third player, Dr. Havelock. Dr. Havelock stood near the fireplace, warming his hands though the room was not cold. His posture was professional, almost clinical. "Natural causes," he said calmly. "Her heart was weak. Stress likely contributed." His voice carried certainty. Too much certainty. The performance authority. Calm diagnosis. Rational explanation. Yet he avoided the fireplace rug where the body had been discovered. His eyes drifted there briefly, then away, too quickly, as though the scene itself made him uncomfortable. The psychology Poirot recalled the case of the Eastbourne conspiracy, where a physician had certified a death as natural while secretly knowing poison was involved. He had spoken confidently, clinically, offering explanations before evidence required them. But Poirot had noticed something crucial. His medical bag remained unopened longer than necessary. A doctor who is certain acts immediately. A doctor who hesitates is already performing reassurance, not truth. The truth Dr. Havelock was not diagnosing. He was defending a version of events. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly. "Too much certainty," he whispered. "It is also a mask. Listener engagement. The audience watches. Watch carefully." Poirot said softly. Each of them performs a different emotion. He gestured lightly towards Sir Malcolm. This man plays control, but control is often fear in disguise. A fire log cracked loudly, like applause from an unseen audience. And Miss Reed, what does she play? Loyalty or desire? Poirot turned slightly, green eyes sharp. Ask yourself, mon ami, why does she look at him when she should be grieving her mistress? The chandelier swayed gently overhead. And the doctor, why does certainty sometimes arrive before truth? A door creaked somewhere in the manor corridor. The stage is active now, Poirot said quietly. The actors have begun to forget they are acting. A moment of discord, Inspector Japp rubbed his chin. They all seem straightforward, Poirot. No contradictions yet. Poirot did not answer immediately. He walked slowly around the room, observing spacing, silence, reactions. The placement of bodies told its own story. Sir Malcolm, too, centered. Miss Reed slightly withdrawn. The doctor positioned near exits. Everything deliberate, everything arranged. Japp, Poirot said finally, when a performance is too perfect, it is because it has been rehearsed. Japp frowned. Or because it's true, Poirot smiled faintly. Truth, mon ami, does not require rehearsal. Ending the second curtain outside, snow pressed against tall windows like an audience waiting for the next act. Inside, the drawing room remained frozen in artificial grief. But something had shifted. A glance held too long. A silence too precise. A breath taken too carefully. Poirot stood at the center of it all, small and unshaken, watching the stage as it slowly revealed its cracks. "The players have entered," he murmured, adjusting his mustache with precision. "But already. Some are forgetting their lines." He turned toward the darkened corridor. "And in this theater of silence, truth is beginning to rehearse its entrance." Chapter 3. The Shift in the Room. The drawing room had changed without changing. The fire still burned. The crystals still shone. The scent of coffee, cigar smoke, and winter lilies still lingered in the air. But something intangible had shifted. Silence was no longer neutral. It was pressure. Sir Malcolm sat straighter now, as though aware the audience had grown sharper. Miss Clara Reed avoided the center of the room entirely. Dr. Havelock stood nearer the doorway than before, each of them unconsciously adjusting their stage positions. Poirot noticed everything. "Observe, mon ami," he murmured softly. "When the actors begin to feel watched, the performance becomes fragile. The first fracture, a detail missed by others. It happened during a simple question. Inspector Japp asked again about the evening timeline. Routine. Predictable." Sir Malcolm answered smoothly. Miss Reed confirmed softly. Dr. Havelock added medical certainty. And then Poirot saw it. Not heard, not spoken, saw. Miss Reed's hand tightened on her handkerchief the moment Sir Malcolm mentioned the library. Not grief, reaction, recognition. A microsecond of awareness before control returned. The mask slipped, then recovered. But Poirot had seen it. Listener engagement. "Did you notice? Did you catch it?" Poirot asked gently. The smallest hesitation, the tightening of fingers. A reaction too fast to be innocence. He stepped slightly forward, eyes sharp. "Ask yourself, mon ami, why would a grieving companion react to a location more than a death?" A grandfather clock chimed in the hall, slow, heavy, like a stage cue. "Truth does not react to words," Poirot continued. "It reacts to meaning." The fire cracked softly. "And meaning, it is what betrays us." Director method. Poirot analyses the shift 1. The performance, Sir Malcolm continued his role flawlessly. Controlled grief, steady voice, dignified sorrow. Miss Reed remained delicate and fragile. Dr. Havelock maintained calm authority. On the surface, nothing changed. The play continued. 2. but now there was hesitation where there had been flow. Sir Malcolm's gaze flicked once toward Miss Reed before answering. Miss Reed avoided eye contact whenever the library was mentioned. Dr. Havelock's explanations grew slightly more elaborate. Too much detail is also a mask. 3. The psychology, past case reflection, 100+ words. Poirot recalled the case of the Carlton House deception, where a family had hidden a suicide behind a staged burglary. Each member of the household had agreed upon a shared narrative. And yet, when questioned separately, one detail always broke consistency. Not in words, but in reaction. One sister flinched when the time of death was mentioned. Not because she was asked directly, but because her mind associated it with something unspoken. Poirot had understood then what he understood now. The human brain cannot fully separate knowledge from emotion. Even when speech is controlled, recognition leaks through the body. A pulse quickens. A breath changes. The truth always leaves physical evidence of itself. 4. The truth. Poirot's gaze settled briefly on Miss Reed. "You are not reacting to grief," he said quietly. "You are reacting to knowledge." Silence followed, not agreement, not denial. Silence that listens too carefully. The first open crack later that afternoon, it happened again. This time sharper. Doctor Havelock mentioned the wine glass found beside the body. Miss Reed flinched immediately. Too immediately, Sir Malcolm noticed. A flicker passed between them, gone in a second, but Poirot saw it. "Ah!" he murmured under his breath. "Now the stage begins to show its seams. Listener engagement. The mask begins to break. You see this now, non?" Poirot said softly. "One word, one object, and the body answers before the mind can lie." He tilted his head slightly. "Ask yourself, what memory lives behind that wine glass?" A gust of wind pressed against the manor windows, making them tremble faintly. "And why does Miss Reed's calm break only when specific objects are named?" A spoon clinked against porcelain somewhere unseen. "The stage is no longer stable," Poirot continued. "The actors are beginning to feel their own roles." Poirot moves closer to the truth. He left the drawing-room without announcement. The others continued speaking, but their voices felt distant now, like dialogue in another room of the theater. Poirot walked the corridor alone. The manor stretched around him. Long carpets, polished wood, portraits of silent ancestors watching like critics who never leave their seats. Perfume lingered faintly in the air. So did cigar smoke. So did something older. Memory. He stopped near a window. Snow pressed against the glass like a silent audience refusing to leave. "Order and method," Poirot whispered. "But also psychology." He turned slightly. "The question is no longer what happened." A pause. "It is who remembers too much." Ending. The first act closes back in the drawing-room. Laughter had briefly returned. False laughter, carefully timed. Performed relief. But Poirot did not return immediately. He stood in the corridor, listening to the theater continue without its director. Inside, the cast believed they were still in control of the script. They were not, because now something had changed. One mask had cracked, and cracks do not remain singular. They spread. Poirot adjusted his mustache slowly, thoughtfully. "The first act," he murmured, "is always where truth begins to forget it is hiding." He turned toward the shadows of the manor. "And now we wait for the second mask to fall." Chapter 4. The pressure of the stage. The drawing-room felt tighter than before. Firelight still burned warmly, but its glow no longer softened the tension. It sharpened it. The scent of cigar smoke lingered stubbornly in the curtains. Fresh coffee sat untouched, growing bitter in porcelain cups. Outside, snow tapped against the windows like impatient applause. Sir Malcolm stood now instead of sitting. Miss Clara Reed had moved closer to the fireplace. Dr. Havelock had opened his medical bag, but not fully. Each movement felt calculated, each silence heavier. Poirot observed them all with quiet precision. "Observe, mon ami," he said softly. "When truth is present, people do not relax. They perform more carefully. Interrogation becomes Theatre Inspector Japp's questions grew sharper. "When exactly did you last see Lady Eleanor alive?" Sir Malcolm answered instantly. "After dinner. She retired early. Miss Reed followed immediately." "Yes, after dinner." Dr. Havelock nodded. "Consistent with fatigue. Too consistent." Poirot tilted his head slightly. 3 voices. 1 script. "Ah," he murmured. "Rehearsal. The first dissonance. It was Miss Reed who made the mistake first. A simple question. Innocent in appearance. Did Lady Eleanor mention feeling unwell that evening?" Miss Reed hesitated. "Just for a fraction." Then smiled. "No, she was quite herself. But Poirot saw it. Not in her words. In the pause before them. The hesitation of memory choosing which version to perform. A faint rustle of silk echoed as she adjusted her dress. Too precise. Too controlled. Listener engagement. The script begins to break. "Did you notice?" Poirot asked gently. "That pause was not silence. It was calculation." He stepped slightly forward, hands clasped behind his back. "Ask yourself, mon ami, why does innocence need to think before answering?" A grandfather clock struck in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like a director marking time between acts. "And when people begin to think before speaking," Poirot continued, "it is because truth and lie are negotiating." The fire cracked softly. "And negotiation always leaves traces." Poirot's director method. Rehearsed performance 1. The performance Sir Malcolm now played authority under strain. Miss Reed played fragile memory. Dr. Havelock played scientific certainty. But all 3 performances were tightening, like costumes becoming too small. 2. The tell Sir Malcolm began to repeat phrases. Miss Reed mirrored emotional language she had not used before. Dr. Havelock referenced typical symptoms without examining the body again. Repetition is rehearsal, and rehearsal is not truth. 3. The psychology, past case reflection, 100+ words. Poirot recalled the case of the Belgrave Hotel scandal, where a group of suspects had agreed upon a shared false timeline after a sudden death. At first, their stories aligned perfectly, too perfectly. But, under continued questioning, small variations began to emerge, not in facts, but in phrasing. One man said, "after 10 o'clock." Another said, "around 10." And a third said, "shortly after 10." Poirot had understood then that deception cannot maintain identical language under stress. The mind improvises. It edits. It softens certainty. Truth is stable. Lies are flexible, and flexibility always creates fractures when pressure is applied repeatedly. 4. The truth. Poirot's gaze moved slowly across the room. "You are all remembering the same story," he said softly, "but not the same truth." Silence followed, not defensive, not relaxed, tight. The second crack it happened again during discussion of the wine. Dr. Havelock described the glass. Miss Reed reacted instantly, too instantly. Her hand moved before thought, then stopped. A correction of instinct. Sir Malcolm noticed again. This time his jaw tightened. A silent exchange passed between them. Invisible dialogue. A performance within a performance. Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah," he murmured. "Now we see backstage communication. Listener engagement. Watch the actors observe carefully now," Poirot said. "This is not conversation. It is coordination." He tilted his head slightly. "Ask yourself, why do 2 people who claim innocence need silent agreement?" A gust of wind moved through the corridor, causing a door to creak softly. "And what happens," he continued, "when coordination becomes unnecessary?" He paused. "Collapse. Rehearsal breaks down. Inspector Japp grew frustrated. You're reading too much into this, Poirot. They're just shaken. Poirot did not disagree. Instead, he watched Sir Malcolm again. The man had begun to pace slightly. Not nervous, structured, measured, like an actor repeating blocking movements on stage. "Mon ami," Poirot said softly. "Notice how he moves." Japp frowned. "What about it?" Poirot smiled gently. "He does not wander. He returns to positions. A pause. That is not anxiety. That is rehearsal." The shift toward strain as questioning continued, the atmosphere changed. Miss Reed's voice grew softer. Dr. Havelock's explanations grew longer. Sir Malcolm's patience shortened, each of them adjusting, each of them compensating. The performance was no longer natural. It was maintained. Poirot stepped back slightly. "Truth does not require maintenance," he said quietly. "But lies, they must be kept alive. Ending. The script fails." The interrogation paused. Not because questions were finished, but because answers were becoming dangerous. Silence filled the drawing room again. But this silence was different now. Not calm, not neutral. Strained, like fabric stretched too far. Poirot looked at each of them once more. The actors, the performers, the suspects. "The lines are beginning to fail," he murmured. Outside, snow continued to fall against the manor windows. Soft, unending, like an audience waiting for the next mistake. Poirot adjusted his mustache with precision. "The rehearsal is over," he said softly. "And now the truth begins to improvise." Chapter 5. The room before the fall. The drawing room was now unbearable in its stillness. Firelight flickered against polished wood and crystal glass, casting restless shadows that seemed to move even when nothing did. The scent of cigar smoke, old perfume, and cold coffee mixed into something heavy, almost suffocating. Snow pressed against the windows like silent spectators refusing to leave their seats. Sir Malcolm stood rigid near the fireplace. Miss Clara Reed remained seated but tense, her fingers tightening repeatedly around her handkerchief. Dr. Havelock had stopped speaking entirely. Poirot stood apart, watching, waiting. "Observe, mon ami," he murmured softly. "When performance becomes too tight, it cannot breathe." The question that broke the rhythm it began with something simple. Poirot did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "Tell me," he said quietly, "who first entered the library after dinner?" The question was ordinary, but the room changed instantly. A pause. "Too long," Sir Malcolm answered first. "I did not enter." Miss Reed followed quickly. I remained in the drawing room," Dr. Havelock added smoothly. "I was in my study preparing notes. 3 answers, 1 stage." But Poirot saw it immediately. Miss Reed's hand tightened too sharply. Not fear, recognition. The moment the mask falls, Poirot's gaze locked onto her. "Miss Reed," he said gently, "you hesitated before answering." She blinked once, then smiled. "A performance. I did not hesitate," she said softly. "I simply wanted to be accurate." But her voice had changed. Slightly. A fraction thinner, a fraction higher. The mask was still there, but it no longer fit perfectly. Sir Malcolm turned toward her. Too quickly. And in that moment, everything broke. "Listener engagement. Did you see it?" "Did you see it?" Poirot asked softly. That moment where words and reaction did not agree. He stepped forward slightly, green eyes sharp. "Ask yourself, mon ami, why would innocence need correction under a simple question?" A log in the fireplace shifted and cracked loudly, like a cue, like applause for a failed performance. "And when correction appears too quickly," Poirot continued, "it is because something inside already knows the truth." The silence tightened. The falling mask. Miss Clara Reed stood suddenly. Too suddenly. The movement was not graceful. It was reactive. "I don't understand what you are implying," she said. But her voice trembled now. not rehearsed trembling, real instability. Poirot watched closely. Her eyes avoided Sir Malcolm. Not Poirot, not Japp, only Sir Malcolm. And that avoidance was not innocence. It was fracture, the performance, a loyal companion, a grieving witness, a fragile woman caught in tragedy. The tell but grief does not avoid a single person in the room. Only secrets do. The psychology, past case reflection. 100+ words. Poirot remembered the case of the Ardenfield confession, where a secretary had maintained innocence during multiple interrogations despite overwhelming evidence. What eventually broke her was not confrontation, but directional focus. When the subject of her employer was mentioned, she consistently turned her head toward one specific person in the room before answering. It was not a conscious gesture. It was psychological anchoring. The human mind, when hiding emotional truth, seeks approval or confirmation from the source most connected to that emotion. Poirot had learned then that deception is rarely isolated. It is relational, and relationships always reveal directionality and stress. The truth Miss Reed was not reacting to accusation. She was reacting to Sir Malcolm, and Sir Malcolm knew it. The second fracture, Sir Malcolm. Sir Malcolm stepped forward. "Clara," he said sharply. "Sit down, not request. Command." The room changed again. Dr. Havelock stepped back slightly. Even Japp noticed now. This was no longer controlled testimony. This was containment failing. The performance grieving husband maintaining dignity. The tell but authority appears only when control is threatened. The psychology Poirot recalled the case of the Westbridge estate, where a grieving widower had remained composed until a single photograph was shown. At that moment, he did not grieve. He instructed others. He reorganized the narrative instantly, correcting details, directing witnesses, shaping interpretation. Poirot had understood that authority under emotional pressure is not confidence. It is defense. The mind shifts from feeling to control when truth becomes dangerous. The truth Sir Malcolm was not mourning, he was managing. And management always implies ownership of something or someone. Listener engagement. The spotlight moves. "Now watch carefully," Poirot said quietly. "The mask is no longer slipping. It is gone." He turned slightly toward Sir Malcolm. "Ask yourself, mon ami, why does a grieving husband command silence instead of feeling it?" A chandelier above them flickered faintly. "And why does Miss Reed obey before she even thinks?" The room felt smaller now, tighter, like a stage closing in. "Dr. Havelock." The quiet withdrawal Dr. Havelock cleared his throat. "I believe this line of questioning is becoming." But he stopped, because Poirot was already looking at him. Silence swallowed his sentence. Not interrupted, collapsed. Poirot studied him carefully. "You are leaving the stage, Doctor," he said softly. Havelock frowned. "I beg your pardon? But you cannot," Poirot continued. "Not yet. A pause. Because even absence is a performance." The mask has fallen. Miss Reed sank back into her chair. Not composed, not delicate, uncertain. Her earlier fragility was gone now, replaced with something else. Fear, real fear. Sir Malcolm stood motionless, watching her, not grieving, assessing, and in that moment Poirot saw it clearly. Not innocence, not coincidence, but alignment, hidden beneath layers of performance. Ending. The curtain shakes. The drawing room no longer felt like a place of questioning. It felt like a stage where one actor had forgotten their script, and the others realized they might be next. Poirot stepped forward slowly. His voice was calm, precise, almost gentle. "The mask has fallen," he said, "and beneath it we begin to see the face." Snow struck the windows harder now, like applause growing uncertain. Poirot adjusted his mustache with care. "The performance," he whispered, "has finally become real." Chapter 6, The Shift into Backstage Reality. The drawing room was quieter now, but not calmer. It was the silence after disruption, the kind that holds tension rather than releases it. Firelight still flickered across polished mahogany and crystal glass, but now every reflection seemed distorted, like truth bending under pressure. The scent of cigar smoke lingered heavier than before. Perfume no longer felt elegant. It felt excessive, almost defensive. Coffee had gone cold, bitter as unresolved questions. Snow pressed against the windows, no longer like an audience, now like witnesses. Poirot stood slightly apart from the others, his gaze steady, almost gentle. "Observe, mon ami," he murmured. "The stage has changed. Now we are behind it. The new space." Backstage of Truth Inspector Japp remained near the doorway, uncomfortable with the shift in atmosphere, Doctor. Havelock had stopped offering explanations altogether. Miss Clara Reed sat rigidly, as though afraid even movement might confirm something. Sir Malcolm stood near the fireplace, no longer performing grief, now performing control. But control is never stable backstage. It is always reactive. Poirot walked slowly between them, not as audience anymore, but as director who had entered behind the set. Here, nothing was arranged for presentation. Here, everything was exposed. What people become when they think no one is. Watching Poirot stop near a side table, a wine glass still remained there, cleaned, replaced, but not forgotten. He looked at it for a long moment, then spoke softly. "This is where truth lives, non? Not on the stage, but behind it." Miss Reed shifted slightly. Too small a movement for most, but not for Poirot. He turned toward her. "You remember this glass, yes?" Silence. Too long, then? "Yes," she said quietly. Not confident, not controlled, real, and that was more revealing than any confession. Listener engagement, backstage signals. "Watch carefully now," Poirot said softly. "This is where people stop acting for others and begin acting for themselves." He stepped slightly closer. "Ask yourself, mon ami, why does a single object disturb someone more than a death?" A fire log collapsed gently, sending sparks upward like fleeting applause. "And why does memory become selective when guilt is present?" The air felt heavier now, not dramatic, psychological. "And behind every performance," Poirot continued, "there is always a private truth trying to escape." The backstage threads begin to connect. Poirot moved toward Sir Malcolm, not confrontational, observational. "You are quieter now," Poirot said gently. Sir Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I have nothing more to say." Poirot nodded. "Yes, that is often what is said when rehearsals are over." A pause. "Tell me, what happens behind the curtain after the final act?" Sir Malcolm did not answer, but his silence was no longer composed. It was guarded. The psychology of backstage behavior. Past case reflection. 100+ words. Poirot recalled the case of the Marbury household deception, where a family had successfully staged a false narrative of accident during a fire. On stage, during police questioning, they had appeared unified, consistent, rehearsed. But behind closed doors, their behavior fractured. One member avoided eye contact with another entirely. Another repeated phrases from interrogation under their breath, as if re-editing their performance. Poirot had realized then that backstage behavior reveals hierarchy of guilt. The person most affected by the truth is not always the one who speaks most. It is the one who cannot stop rehearsing the event privately. Human psychology cannot maintain separation between performed innocence and internal knowledge. One always leaks into the other. The truth behind the curtain, people stop performing for others and begin revealing themselves to themselves. Miss Reed, backstage collapse. Miss Clara Reed stood slowly this time, not dramatically, not rehearsed, carefully. She looked at Sir Malcolm, Not Poirot, not Jap, only him. And Poirot saw it clearly now. Not devotion, not fear, something far more dangerous, dependency. "Tell them," she whispered. The room froze. Sir Malcolm did not move immediately. That hesitation alone said everything. Poirot watched carefully. "Ah," he murmured, "now we are backstage. Listener engagement, the real relationship. Do you see it now?" Poirot asked softly. "This is not grief, not innocence, not confusion." He tilted his head slightly. "Ask yourself, why does one person in a room have permission to silence another?" A distant wind moved through the manor corridors. And what kind of relationship exists when silence is obeyed instantly? The chandelier above them trembled faintly. "Behind every performance," Poirot said, "there is always hierarchy." The doctor steps back. Dr. Havelock moved toward the door again, this time more deliberately. Poirot noticed. "You leave again, doctor?" Havelock paused. "I believe my presence is no longer required." Poirot nodded gently. "But backstage," he said softly, "everyone is required. A pause. Even those who wish to exit." Havelock did not respond, but he did not leave either. The backstage structure revealed Poirot walked slowly now, as if mapping invisible lines. "This manor," he said quietly, "is not a house. A pause. It is a structure of relationships." He turned slightly toward Sir Malcolm. "And structures always reveal who supports them and who depends upon them." Miss Reed's breathing quickened slightly. Poirot noticed. "Always. Ending. The curtain is half open." The room was no longer a stage. It was something more exposed, less controlled. The illusion of performance had not disappeared, but it had shifted. Now they were aware of it, and awareness changes everything. Poirot stopped near the center of the room. His voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. "We are no longer watching a performance," he said. "We are watching what remains when the performance stops." A long silence followed, heavy, unfinished. Snow pressed harder against the windows, like the world itself, leaning in to listen. Poirot adjusted his mustache slowly. "And behind every curtain," he murmured, "there is always a truth waiting for its entrance." Chapter 7. The stage is reset. Final assembly. The drawing room had been transformed once again. But now it felt stripped, no longer elegant, no longer warm, only exposed. Firelight still burned, but it no longer softened anything. Instead, it revealed angles too sharp, shadows too honest. The scent of cigar smoke and perfume remained. But now it felt like residue from a performance already finished. Snow pressed against the windows like an audience refusing to leave before the ending. Poirot stood at the center, still controlled, his green eyes steady. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said softly, "the final act begins." The cast assembled. Sir Malcolm Vance stood rigid, no longer performing grief or authority. Now he simply stood. Miss Clara Reed sat trembling slightly, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. "Doctor." Havelock remained near the door, as though still calculating escape routes. Inspector Japp watched in silence, and Poirot became director fully now, not observer, not investigator, director of truth. Poirot's revelation. The performance unravels. Poirot walked slowly forward. His voice changed, not louder, more precise. "You have all performed for me," he said quietly. "And I thank you, because in performance truth reveals itself." He turned slightly towards Sir Malcolm. "The grieving husband, you played grief," Poirot said gently. "But grief does not remain so composed. It does not stand so straight. It does not control silence. It collapses into it." Sir Malcolm's jaw tightened. "The tell." "But you," Poirot continued, "controlled everything. Your voice, your movements, even your pauses. That is not mourning, monsieur. That is management." A pause. "And control appears only when loss is not emotional, but strategic." Poirot turned toward Miss Reed. "The loyal companion. You played devotion," he said softly. "Fragile, afraid, grieving." Miss Reed's breath hitched, but devotion does not react to specific objects. It does not flinch at words like wineglass or library, unless those words carry meaning. "The tell and meaning," Poirot said, "is always personal." Silence tightened. Poirot turned to Doctor. "Havelock, the certain doctor. You played certainty," Poirot said, but certainty arrived too quickly. Before full examination, before full inquiry. Havelock frowned slightly. "That is professional experience," he said. Poirot nodded. "Yes. Or preparation. Listener engagement. The final question. Now watch carefully," Poirot said softly. "The final act is not about evidence." He stepped slightly forward. "It is about collapse." A clock chimed somewhere in the manor. Slow. Final. Ask yourself, mon ami, who benefits when truth is replaced with certainty? The fire flickered sharply. And who fears what certainty cannot explain? The turning point. The mask breaks completely. Poirot stopped. His gaze sharpened. Then he said it. Not dramatically, not loudly, but precisely. "You were not all reacting to Lady Eleanor's death," he said. "You were reacting to what led to it." A pause. The room tightened. Miss Reed's eyes widened slightly. Sir Malcolm did not move. But Poirot saw it. The smallest shift, recognition. The psychology of the final act. Past case reflection. 100+ words. Poirot recalled the case of the Davenham railway murder, where multiple passengers had maintained consistent alibis during questioning. On the surface, each account aligned perfectly. But Poirot had noticed something subtle. Emotional synchronization. 2 passengers reacted to certain words with identical timing, down to breath intake. It was not coincidence. It was shared knowledge. He had realized then that guilt does not isolate individuals. It connects them. People involved in the same secret unconsciously mirror emotional responses because their psychological burden is shared. Even when they attempt separation, their reactions betray alignment. The human mind cannot fully conceal shared experience under pressure. The revelation moment. Poirot's spotlight. Poirot raised one hand slightly, not accusatory, revealing. "The death of Lady Eleanor Vance," he said quietly, "was not an accident." A pause. But it was also not committed by one person alone. The room froze. Snow struck the windows harder. Like sudden applause. Listener engagement. "Did you see it forming?" "Did you see it forming?" Poirot asked softly. The alignment. The reactions. The shared tension beneath separate masks. He stepped slightly forward. "Ask yourself, why do 2 people fear the same detail?" Silence. "And why does one man command silence while another obeys it without question?" The chandelier above them trembled faintly. "Truth," Poirot said, "does not exist in isolation here." The final act tension. Miss Reed stood suddenly. This time not trembling, not rehearsed, broken. "You don't understand," she whispered. Sir Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, not in grief, in calculation. Poirot watched them both, calm, steady. "And now," he said gently, "the performance ends." A pause. The truth enters. Ending. The curtain falls. The room felt smaller now. Not physically, psychologically. Like space itself had collapsed under recognition. Poirot stepped back slightly. His voice softened. "The final act," he said, "is never about discovery. A pause. It is about exposure." He looked at each of them once more. No anger, no judgment, only clarity. Snow outside continued falling. Soft, endless, like an audience that finally understood the ending. Poirot adjusted his mustache with precision. "And now," he murmured, "the curtain prepares to fall." Chapter 8. The room after performance. The drawing room felt hollow in a new way. Not empty, stripped. The fire still burned, but its warmth no longer reached anyone. The crystal glasses still reflected light, but it no longer looked elegant, only abandoned. The scent of cigar smoke and perfume lingered like costumes left behind after actors have gone home. Snow pressed against the windows more gently now, no longer like an audience, now like silence itself settling in. Poirot stood slightly apart, observing not the crime anymore, but its aftermath. "Observe, mon ami," he said softly. "The theatre has ended. Now we see what remains when masks are removed." The fallen cast Sir Malcolm Vance no longer stood like a commander of narrative. He sat now, still, quiet, as though movement itself had lost meaning. Miss Clara Reed remained seated, hands folded tightly, no longer performing fragility, because fragility had become reality rather than role. Doctor Havelock stood near the doorway, but he no longer looked for escape. Inspector Japp had lowered his notebook. No more questions, no more script, only silence. The curtain call begins. Poirot stepped forward slowly, not as interrogator, not as director, but as witness to the final moment of truth. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said softly, "you have all given your performances." A pause. "And now there is no more stage." Sir Malcolm did not respond. Miss Reed did not look up. Dr. Havelock closed his eyes briefly, because they all understood the performance was no longer required. Listener engagement, no more acting. "Do you see it now?" Poirot asked quietly. "The difference between performance and consequence." He stepped slightly forward. "Ask yourself, mon ami, what happens when there is no audience left to deceive?" A fire log collapsed softly, sending a small shower of sparks upward. "And who are we?" Poirot continued, "when there is no longer a role to play?" Silence deepened. Not tense. Final. The aftermath of truth. Inspector Japp finally spoke. "We'll handle it from here." His voice was lower now, respectful. Not of crime, but of its unraveling. Sir Malcolm gave no protest. That was the most revealing response of all. Miss Reed finally exhaled. Long, uncontrolled, real. Dr. Havelock placed his medical bag down beside the door and did not touch it again. Poirot watched them all, quietly, carefully. The psychology of aftermath, past case reflection, 100+ words. Poirot thought briefly of the case of the Montclair inheritance trial, where a family had been exposed after years of deception surrounding a forged will. The revelation itself had been dramatic, but what fascinated Poirot more was what followed. After truth emerged, the family did not continue arguing. They stopped performing entirely. The most vocal accused fell silent. The most innocent accused no longer defended themselves. It was as though identity itself required deception to function, and once deception collapsed, so too did the need for expression. Poirot had understood then that the aftermath of truth is not noise. It is silence. A silence that feels unfamiliar because it is unperformed. The curtain call moment. Poirot moved slowly toward the center of the room. The fireplace crackled behind him. Soft, final. He looked at each of them once more, not as suspects, but as people who had been forced out of roles they had worn too long. "The curtain call has come," he said gently. "No applause, only breath, only realization. Listener engagement. The last observation. Watch carefully now," Poirot said softly. "This is the moment most people do not recognize." He tilted his head slightly. "Ask yourself, why does truth feel quieter than lies?" A distant clock chimed once in the hallway. "And why does silence feel heavier when no one is performing within it?" The room remained still. Not frozen, finished. Justice enters the stage. Inspector Japp finally stepped forward. "It's time." His voice carried finality. Sir Malcolm nodded once. Miss Reed did not resist. Dr. Havelock simply turned toward the door. One by one, they accepted what came next, not because they agreed, but because performance no longer shielded them. Poirot did not stop them. He never interfered with the final act of consequence. He only observed. Ending. No applause. The drawing room remained unchanged. And yet everything within it had changed. The fire still burned. The manor still stood. The snow still fell. But the story that had once filled the space with deception, tension, and performance had ended. Poirot remained a moment longer, then spoke softly. "The curtain call has come," he said. "No applause, a pause, only truth." He turned toward the shadowed corridor and walked away. Behind him, Blackstone Manor no longer felt like a theater, only a place where a performance had finally ended. Chapter 8. The Manor Without Actors. The manor felt larger now, not physically but emotionally. Without the presence of performance, every room expanded into emptiness, as though truth itself required more space than lies ever did. The drawing room no longer held tension. It held memory. The fireplace still burned, but no one sat before it. The crystal glasses still reflected light, but no hands lifted them. The perfume and cigar smoke had faded into something softer, residual, like costumes hanging after a final curtain. Snow outside the windows no longer felt like an audience. It felt like time continuing without story. Poirot stood alone in the corridor for a moment, listening to the quiet. "Observe, mon ami," he murmured. "When performance ends, space begins to speak. What remains?" When masks are gone, he walked slowly through the manor. Each step echoed differently now, louder, clearer. There was no distraction left to absorb sound, no voices to soften the architecture of truth. He paused near the library door, the scene of the first fracture, the place where performance had first slipped. Now it was only a room again. Wood, books, stillness, no tragedy remaining in its shape, only memory of interpretation. Listener engagement. The silence after truth. "Listen carefully," Poirot said softly. "This is what most people do not understand about endings." He stepped forward slightly. "Ask yourself, mon ami, why does silence feel unfamiliar after truth is revealed?" A distant wind passed through the manor walls, soft as breath. "And why does absence feel heavier than deception ever did?" He turned his head slightly. "Because lies occupy space," he said quietly, "and truth leaves it empty." The people after the performance down the corridor, a door closed softly. Not dramatically. Simply the household was changing now, not collapsing, reorganizing. Staff moved quietly, like stagehands after a production, removing traces of performance without commentary. No one spoke of the evening as tragedy anymore. It had already transformed into something else in their minds. An event, a conclusion, a story that would be retold in quieter tones. Poirot observed them briefly. He understood this transformation. People could not remain inside truth for long. They needed narrative again, even if simpler, even if incomplete. Poirot and the aftermath of clarity. Past case reflection, 100+ words. Poirot thought of the case of the St. James Ballroom affair, where a murder investigation had concluded during a high society event. After the revelation, guests did not react with shock for long. Instead, they reorganized themselves socially. Conversations shifted away from crime toward weather, travel, and music. Poirot had observed this phenomenon carefully. Humans resist prolonged exposure to absolute truth. Once clarity is achieved, the mind seeks balance by returning to structure, even if superficial. It is not denial. It is psychological restoration. The mind cannot remain in revelation indefinitely. It requires rhythm again. Even artificial rhythm is preferable to emotional stillness. The manor rewrites itself. Poirot entered the drawing room once more. Now it felt different, not haunted, not tense. Rewritten, as though the space itself had accepted a new version of its history. The furniture remained in place, but its meaning had shifted. Chairs were no longer witness positions. The table was no longer an interrogation surface. The fireplace was no longer center stage. It was just a room, and yet it remembered. Poirot adjusted his mustache gently. "Memory," he said softly, "is the final audience. Listener engagement, the last shift. Tell me, mon ami," Poirot said, "if you return to a place where everything has changed, but nothing has moved, what do you feel?" A soft creak echoed through the manor ceiling. Ask yourself, does truth change a place? A pause. Or does it only remove what was pretending to belong there? The air felt lighter now, but emptier, the final walk through. The stage Poirot walked slowly through the manor one last time. The corridor where glances had once collided. The staircase where hesitation had once spoken louder than words. The library where recognition had first cracked the illusion. Each space now stood neutral, but not innocent. Nothing returns to innocence after truth, only to neutrality. He stopped at the entrance hall. Snowlight filtered through stained glass, casting faint colors onto polished floorboards. Beautiful, quiet, finished, the theater empties completely. Outside, the world continued, without interruption. Carriages moved along distant roads. Towns remained unaware of the drama that had unfolded behind manor walls. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm, untouched by psychological collapse within these rooms. Poirot understood this separation. Crime created meaning only within its stage. Outside it, the world simply continued. He stepped toward the door, paused, looked once more into the manor, not as investigator, not as director, but as someone who had witnessed a complete performance from opening act to final silence. Ending the lesson of after the show, the theater is empty now, Poirot said softly. No actors remain. A pause, but the performance, it does not disappear. He adjusted his coat slightly. It becomes memory. Another pause. And memory, he said gently, is always watching. Poirot stepped out into the cold air. Snow fell around him like fading applause. Behind him, Blackstone Manor stood silent, not broken, not victorious, just finished. Chapter 10, Poirot's Retreat. After the stage, the room was warm. Comfortably so. A soft fire burned in the hearth, steady and controlled, unlike the restless flames of Blackstone Manor. The scent of rich coffee lingered in the air, paired with a faint sweetness of preserved fruit and delicate pastry. Somewhere nearby, polished wood gleamed under soft lamplight, and heavy curtains muted the outside world into irrelevance. Poirot sat in his chair with precision, as always composed, always deliberate. No suspects now, no audience, only thought. He adjusted his mustache carefully. "Ah," he said softly, "at last, silence that is not pressure." The case replay, not events, but behavior. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. He did not replay the murder. He replayed the people. Sir Malcolm Vance, the composed widower, the man who controlled grief as though it were an instrument. Miss Clara Reed, the fragile companion, or rather, fragility as performance. Dr. Havelock, certainty dressed as science. Each of them had believed they were acting within truth. But they were not acting truth. They were acting roles. And roles, Poirot knew, always betray the actor eventually. Listener engagement? What did you really see? Think back, mon ami, Poirot said quietly. Did you watch the evidence or the emotion behind it? He leaned slightly forward. Ask yourself, when someone speaks too smoothly, do you trust the words or the need for them to be smooth? A pause. The little grey cells, he added gently, do not listen only to what is said. They listen to what must be controlled. The psychology of masks, past case reflection extended. Poirot thought back to many cases, but one remained especially instructive. The case of the Hotel du Lac deception. A woman had once maintained perfect composure after discovering her husband's betrayal. She spoke calmly, ate dinner politely, and even smiled at guests. No one suspected her involvement in the later tragedy that followed. Yet Poirot had noticed something no one else did. She corrected small objects constantly. A glass moved a few millimeters. A napkin straightened repeatedly. A spoon aligned again and again. It was not tidiness. It was control replacing emotion. Later, it became clear that she had already decided everything before anyone else realized anything was wrong. Her calmness was not innocence. It was conclusion. And Poirot had learned something essential. When emotion is not expressed, it is redirected. Into detail, into control, into performance. Blackstone Manor had been no different. Sir Malcolm controlled people instead of grief. Miss Reed controlled perception instead of truth. Dr. Havelock controlled interpretation instead of uncertainty. And in each case, control replaced something deeper they could not afford to reveal. Poirot's analysis. The three masks. Poirot opened his eyes. His gaze sharpened slightly, though the room remained calm. "Let us be precise," he said softly. Sir Malcolm did not merely hide emotion. He replaced it with authority. A pause. Miss Reed did not merely hide fear. She replaced it with attachment. Another pause. And the doctor did not merely hide doubt. He replaced it with certainty. Poirot leaned back slightly. "And so, mon ami, what do we learn?" A soft crackle from the fire answered for him. "We learn that every mask has a function. Listener engagement, the question of identity. Now consider this," Poirot said gently. "If someone wears a mask long enough, does it become them?" He tilted his head slightly. "Or does it eventually break, when truth no longer allows it to breathe?" A long pause followed. "The psychology of crime," he continued softly, "is not about violence. It is about maintenance. What people must maintain in order to continue being who they believe they are." The human drama behind the mystery. Poirot stood slowly and walked toward the window. Outside, the world was ordinary. No theater, no performance, only life continuing without awareness of its hidden dramas. He spoke quietly. "In Blackstone Manor, no one believed they were lying," he said. "They believed they were surviving." A pause. "But survival," Poirot added gently, "is often the most convincing disguise of all." He turned back toward the room. "And yet, truth does not judge intention. It reveals structure. The final case in sight. Why?" The masks failed. Poirot returned to his chair. His tone softened. "The reason the performance collapsed," he said, "was not because they were careless." A pause. "It was because they were connected." He folded his hands neatly. Connected guilt does not remain stable. It synchronizes, it reacts, it echoes. A small smile touched his lips. And when echoes become too loud, the original sound is exposed. Listener engagement. Final observation. "Ask yourself one last question, mon ami," Poirot said. "If truth always emerges under pressure, what does that tell you about lies?" A pause. "Are they strong or merely delayed?" The fire burned steadily, calm, unmoving, as though even it understood the lesson. Closing wisdom. Poirot's final director's note. Poirot sat back fully now, relaxed, reflective. Not the investigator, not the director, simply the observer of human nature. "In every case," he said softly, "I do not seek guilt first. I seek performance." A pause. "Because once I understand the role each person believes they are playing, the truth becomes inevitable." He adjusted his mustache with gentle precision, and Blackstone Manor was no exception. Final ending. The curtain never fully closes. Poirot looked once more toward the quiet room. No urgency remained, only understanding. "The theater of crime," he said softly, "never truly ends." A final pause. "Only the actors change." He smiled faintly. "Until the next performance, mes amis." Poirot rose, turned, and walked away. "The curtain will rise again."